Today's toolbox talk is geared towards excavations and specifically how many people do we need on each excavation? So we want to dig right into this. And one of the first things to consider is what does OSHA have to say about how many people we have on a job? OSHA doesn't specify a specific number of team members for an excavation job. There's a couple of standards that are written for us in 1926, both 651 and 652. They focus on safety controls, hazard preventions, protective systems, not specifically how many people need to be on every excavation. So, in situations like for us, where there is a small or low risk excavation, that would be classified as a downspout repair where you're pulling out the drain for the gutters for a house. It's coming down the downspout, going through the yard, maybe a foot or two deep, maybe 3 feet, or even a 3 foot water line would be considered a low risk excavation. And that's where one competent person would be enough. The reality is that if an excavation is sold for 3 feet or 4 feet, and then it becomes a 5 foot deep excavation, then we're back to the three people are required because we need that third person for shoring. That's going to be the trend. If shoring's required, three people are required for the job. So it may be sold as a two-man job, and because they're estimates, it may develop into a three-person job, which, as I believe, it will need to be an upsell for the additional person. Sand is another exception. It could be a 3 foot excavation, but because it's based in sand, it's going to require shoring in order to be able to remove the old plumbing and put the new plumbing in. So on the bottom line, there's really no fixed minimum number of people that OSHA says, with the exception of at least one competent person is required to be on every excavation. The next thing we want to look at is on jobs that one competent person is required. That's going to be an excavation where the mechanical excavator isn't needed, where a shovel or two is going to be enough for the job. It's going to be a hand dig only job, again, for drains, downspouts, water lines. And whenever you have a one person job or a lone worker, as OSHA describes it, they add in a check-in process. If you notice the standard here in 1915.84, OSHA sets the standards for a lone worker so that we could make sure that they're out there working in a safe environment. It requires a check-in. So an excavation field supervisor or the general manager needs to check in with that lone worker every hour on the hour. They need to check in before they start their work, every hour throughout their job, and at the close of that excavation. A picture of that text, the communication going back and forth from the leadership to the competent person needs to be snapshotted, uploaded into Service Titan so that when the safety department is doing the audits, we can verify this important communication is actually happening. So that leads us to the next step on 4 foot excavation jobs. How many people do we need? As with all of these standards, there's always going to be some sort of exception. It would be nice if we could create a cookie cutter policy and procedures that one size fit all. And what we're doing is we're creating some guidelines that one fits most. So 4 foot excavation jobs, Remember, you always need a ladder at 4 foot deep and deeper. Um, you can still have an excavation that requires a mechanical excavator, a Caterpillar, Bobcat, whatever it is that we're using. Still need can be a two-person job as long as shoring isn't required. Once a trench is established, that competent person stays on top of the trench. Their job is to look at the condition of the trench wall specifically. They're looking for fissuring and cracking. They're also watching down for the welfare of the person who is in the trench. While the excavator is moving, nobody needs to be in the trench. That person comes up out of the trench and becomes the spotter for the excavator, that competent person. So, in places where we're under the 5 foot requirement for protective system, we still may need it because of the unstable soil. We can have Class C soil that's embedded, roots are embedded throughout, that makes it a little bit more stable. We don't see signs of fissuring or cracking. That's fine. But when we get into the less cohesive soils, specifically sand, or these trench walls are collapsing, then a third person is going to be needed because to keep the employees safe, we need to add shoring. That brings us to excavations at 5 feet deep or deeper. We need a minimum of 3 people on every job. 3 people is plenty on every job where shoring or shielding is protected. So speed shoring or a trench box. Those are the two things. That means a competent person and 2 team members. Anytime the excavator is needed for a job in combination of shoring, you need 3 people on excavations. So, for example, on Saturday, we had an excavation that was 80 feet long. Most of that trench was at 4 feet deep. If there was a 1 foot section that was 5 feet deep, that entire trench becomes a 3 person job. OSHA told a story. I took the competent person class twice, 2 different safety councils. And the one that I like the most is in Hillside, Illinois, just to the west of Chicago. And the OSHA instructor there was a retired OSHA supervisor, and he would train the OSHA employees in this manner. He would look for the deepest section of that trench. And so if we overturned a stone, a big rock in that trench, and it took out a couple of inches, he would teach the OSHA inspectors to run your tape measure at that deepest spot. If everything else was 4 foot 11, but that one little spot was 5 feet deep, that became a 5 foot excavation, and we should hold true to that same standard. Remember, when a field supervisor utilizes some tools, we're doing an estimate. That estimate of 4 foot 6 inches very easily could go in either direction. More than likely, it's going to go deeper. So on the field supervisor's challenge, a 2 person dig may need to be upsold for a 3 person dig because of what we actually find when we get in there. Now, if you have any questions about this presentation, I want to encourage you to rewatch this. It'll be recorded and it's placed up on our YouTube safety channel. If that still leaves some questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My phone number is 330-488-4141, and we can take it from there. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to